virtual platform and it's open to all. My name is Banica and I will moderate MD. As you heard before I started, there's a lot of talk about the Kudo meeting system. Some of you will be watching this on the Kudo system. Some of you will be watching this on live stream on YouTube. There'll be a slight delay. Please be patient with us. When we request for the floor, it will take several seconds before it comes on. For the speakers, I will give you a 2-minute warning before your 15 minutes is up. The Q&A session will be held at the end of this session. And as usual, please identify yourself. Say which speaker you are addressing. For those of you who are watching us on YouTube, you can ask the question by posting a comment. My colleague in Yokohama will pick up your comment and email it to me. And hopefully that works. All the presentations are available for download in the Kudo system during the ongoing meeting. If you click on documents to the right-hand side of your screen, you can download it. Also, the documents will be made available later on in the ITTO website, which is this. Okay, it's basically ittto.int/57/presentations. And all the PowerPoint files will be up there. At the end of the market discussion, the trade advisory group will make a trade statement. And a copy of this trade statement will also be made available. Today, we have speakers from Brazil, China, USA, France, Singapore, Indonesia, and Switzerland. And I'm based in Kuching, Malaysia, on the island of Borneo. So this would be quite tricky. Some of you, the Brazil side will be at 6 a.m. now. My Washington friends at 4 a.m. Chris Wilson and the New Zealanders at 10 p.m. So all of us will be looking very jet-lagged in your own home. So without much further ado, let us go into the market discussion proper. And I'll call upon our first speaker and a very old friend of ours, Ivan Stomacelli. Ivan is the president of STCP, which is a Brazilian consulting, engineering, and management company. He has over 40 years of professional experience in developing projects related to forest industry and forest products market, public policy, and sectoral programs. He has worked as consultant for several international organizations, including ITTO, FAO, ITC, World Bank, and so on. He's also a professor at the Federal University of Paraná. So Ivan, please, the floor is yours. Please request to speak the bottom right button.
We are in the middle of somewhere. Can you hear me? Okay, I'll be talking about the impacts of COVID on the Latin America forest sector and the recovery. Next slide, please. So this is the title of my presentation. Next slide. So we all know that COVID has created a global health, economic, and environmental and social crisis. Up to now, more than 250 million cases and over 5 million deaths has happened. Global economic downturn was faced by many countries, or most countries, in view of a reduction in consumption and price of commodity and in energy, and governments faced the increasing fiscal deficit over and higher weight of the government in the economy. We also had changes for private people in privacy rights. Latin America was, as other continents, very much affected. Almost 20% of the global cases happened in Latin America. Brazil alone had over 222 million cases and over 600,000 deaths. Countries as Colombia, Mexico, and Peru had between 2 and 5 million cases. Next slide, please. The macroeconomic impacts started in 2020. At the second quarter, there was a general drop in the GDP, industrial production, energy consumption, international trade. Brazil alone had a drop in the GDP of 9.7%. Also, we had a drop in the industrial production of 18% and 10% in the international trade. Mexico also had a drop of 18.7%. But recovery in most countries started along the third quarter of 2020. GDP continued to drop in Peru, and the overall drop in the year in the region was around 7%. 2021, there was some change. The the projections made by CEPAL, which is the Economic Commission for Latin America and Caribbean region, is a growth of 5.9%, most as a result of demand and prices increase on commodities at the international market. The 2021 projection of GDP is a bit lower, 2.9%, and the reduction that we are going to be facing next year are due to structural problems that continue to impact the region. So between 2014 and 2019, for instance, the region only show a growth of 0.3%. Next slide, please. During the pandemic period, national and local governments has imposed some restriction and other measures. Governments imposes restriction to mitigate the impact on health. Measures varied from very long lockdowns and to social distancing. This had some impact on cost, production, and logistics. In most countries of the region, the forest sector was considered as essential sector, but short-term restrictions to operate were imposed by some national and local governments, especially in countries such as Peru and Ecuador, that had long, severe restrictions. Besides increasing investments in the national health, government supported health programs and implemented actions to mitigate the economic and social impact, including flexibilization of work relationship, financial aid to unemployed persons, increases the ability to finance and facilitate credit access to companies, and postponed tax payments and renegotiation of private sector and government loans. Next slide, please. The impact on the market varied among countries, regions, industry, and products. Latin America forest sector depends on many countries of the region, depends on international trade. Around 70% of the pulp and plywood, for instance, of the region is exported. Some countries have large national market, but others depends mainly on exports. Generally, the international market is concentrated in US, China, and some European countries. But the domestic consumption reduced significantly along the third quarter of 2020. Exports show no significant change, but international market prices of solid wood products declined in April and May of 2020. Next slide, please. What are the perspectives of the first quarter of 2020? At that time, in 2020, government supports to people and companies. It was expected that it might work and mitigate social and economic impact. In any case, consumers' confidence and behavior has changed, and the expectations was that we will achieve a new normal along the year. Pulp industry was less affected, but a reduction in demand and prices of solid wood products was between 20 and 40% along in first two quarters of 2020. Small and medium-sized companies was expected to be more affected, and that the recovery will take 2 years or more. Impacts was expected that will be stronger in exporting companies, especially those with market concentration in US and Europe. And the full economic recovery was expected to be taking on a long time. This was the expectations we had in the first semesters of 2020. Next slide, please. What happened along 2021? COVID has affected the country's regions, but timber industry was generally very little affected. Production continued and the exports increased. Along 2021, global demand and prices of commodity had a positive economic impact and social impact. Demand of prices, for instance, demand and prices increased significantly. If you give you an example of Brazil, tropical plywood in 2020, exports of tropical plywood increased 15%, and in 2021, over 2020, is expected to increase around 19%. So most of the products exported by Brazil increased along the last 2 years, and this is a general trend for the region. Economic development perspectives are positive in most countries of the region, but international demand and prices start to decline in the last quarter of 2021. Next slide, please. This is an overview of the short-term perspectives for 2022 to 2025. COVID is still considered as a problem. There is slow vaccination in some countries and a lack of confidence of consumers. International prices and demand are expected to continue to decline along the next 2 years or 3. The region has political and structural limitations, lack of confidence in the economic policy, lack of innovation, inadequate infrastructure. But logistics seems the major problem. There's a strong limitation of containers, as all we from timber industry know. Prices are very high, in some cases 10 times higher than in the past. A container to Europe, for instance, from Brazil, will cost you around $12,000, and we used to pay not more than $1,500 3 years ago. Companies are stacking products at ports, at factories, and other places. Orders have been canceled as clients are not willing to wait or to pay for higher logistic costs. Reduction of sales and increase in demand of working capital is a problem. Some factories have already reduced the production, and employment has been reduced. Improvements in logistics are expected to happen only in 2022. Next slide, please. Well, thank you very much. I hope this presentation helped you to have a brief idea of the developments of COVID in the region around 2020 and 2021. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivan. Also, thank you for keeping to your time. Our next speaker is Mr. Wu Shengfu. Shengfu is a general manager of the Green Panel Corporation. He's the vice chairman of China National Forest Products Industry Association. He was a convener of the ISO TC 218 and a wooden products convener of TC 296, which is on bamboo flooring. He's on the advisory committee on sustainable forest-based industries in FAO, and he's also an associate professor in Nanjing Forestry University and Beijing Forestry University. Shengfu, please, the floor is yours.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Shengfu Wu. I'm working in Beijing Green Forest Certification Company Limited, as well as the China National Forest Product Industry Association. Today, I was asked to give the presentation on the challenges of manufacturing and the trade during the pandemic COVID-19. So everybody knows that the pandemic is spreading still now worldwide. The pandemic changed the way of our life, changed the business model, changed the world order, changed the economics, and changed the policies. In general, China has the biggest market on timber products, and China has a big export on the timber products such as plywood, flooring, door sets, furniture, toys, photo frames, cabinets. And China has rich resources, not only on the plantation forest, but also on the bamboo and the straw. Nowadays, China is well used for the bamboo and the straw for the panel and also other products. And the Chinese people are comprehensive, skillful, diligent, disciplined, and hardworking. Thank you them very much, which made the Chinese woodworking industry so well. As my experience, I have been traveling worldwide. This only works in China for the woodworking for the labor-intensive industry. And also China have saved about 30% of GHG emission in the wood industry because the cost cutting about rough saw is about 2% to 3% less. And also the recovery of the product to utilization is 3 to 8% higher. And the comprehensive utilization is 2 to 3% higher. Productivity and reproduce is about 3% difference. And the quality and the durable increase of lifetime of the product is about 8 to 15%. All these makes differences for the GHG emission. In terms of challenge, the first challenge is the cost, because nowadays the labor cost increased, the materials like the wood, glue, lacquer, and the film are increased. All the auxiliary costs like electricity, heat, oil are increased. Especially the shipping costs nowadays for some shipping lines nearly about 10 times higher. I think you will hear about other topics about the shipping as well as the currency exchange. All this makes the cost increase so much. So this is the biggest challenge now we have. The next challenge, next slide please. Next challenge is about the trade. Because of the pandemic, the communication and the promotion between the supplier and the buyer should be rebuilt. And also the trade barrier have been increased not only for commercial, but also for technical and the political. Next slide, please. The next challenge is about the travel, because nowadays almost worldwide have the travel restrictions, not only local but also international, especially. Like last week when I was traveling, I should carry with the vaccination certificate as a right side. That's my certificate. When I traveled last week, I should carry all the certificate for those people who are asked for. Then it's safe for me and also safe for travel. Next slide, please. The next challenge is about the technical, because now the technical change is everywhere and all time. And in China, now we already use about the 5G technologies, especially on the customized processing for the furniture, door sets, and the cabinets, like in the picture. Next slide, please. And also next the challenge is about raw material, because almost all countries now is limited for the log export. So there is no place to get enough timber for the woodworking industry. And on the picture, like the middle one, personally, I was traveling in the South America. This log was slowed away in the forest. But if it is in China, in Beijing, it cost about 100,000 yuan on the market, which is a big loss there. Next slide, please. Also about the raw material, like for the NDF and the particle board on the pictures, on the up pictures. In China, we have been used almost all the residues and the rubbish, even the sawdust and the barks. But in other countries, like all this raw material have not been collected, used, but they make the fires even. So that's the big changes. They just contribution for the climate change, but we are now using for the raw materials. Next, please. Also the challenges for innovation, because nowadays environmental friendly products are rarely adopted on market, and low or no toxic on the resin and the products processing are required. So the water-based paint for home finishing already replaced the alcohol soluble resins, especially in China on the market. Next, please. Also the innovation, like our industry and also our association, we have been used the blockchain concept to develop the supply chain management. Only in this way, we feel that the supply chain can manage it well and use in the place. Also, we are cooperating with the big companies for the supply chain management, use this concept. Next slide, please. The next challenge is about corporate social responsibilities and legality. So we are, like our association, we developed the legal timber verification system, which priority to purchase the timber resourced from the certified or legality verified products, and the priority to purchase recycled materials. And all the member companies do not use high-risk materials. Next slide, please. In terms of production in China, you can be unbelievably know that just on the wood-based panel industry, the capacity and production nowadays is about 300 million cubic meters. From there, about 6% is on plywood. Bit more than 20% is on MDF. 10% is on the particle board, and 5% or 6% about is for the other panels. So this makes the big industry in China, and also is the biggest in worldwide. Next slide, please. About the timber import. In China, we have been import less and less for the logs because there are no logs available. But we have import more and more timber products, as well as the waste materials like the waste paper and all other residues, which have been used in our industry, especially on the particle board and the MDF. Next slide, please. About the forest product trade, both import and export in China is, I cannot say the increasing, but still growing, because the values are getting better. The volumes are now still declining. Next slide, please. Last but not least, let me talk a little bit about the Belt and Road Initiative. China have been leading this initiative and also have been working more than 100 countries. Like on the picture on the right side, we have the EU-Europe Shuttle. This train have been running started from 2014, and this year up to October the 21st, they already have been run more than 1,000 trains to Europe only from EU, one country. So thousands of products are loaded there, like the hardware, textiles, car spare parts, daily life wares, machineries, equipment, tools, of course, as well as the wooden products. You can imagine that only 10 months, more than 1,000 trains already running between this one country, one destination to Europe. They are already around about 125 countries total. This is a very big traveling. And also, the next slide, please. About the Belt and Road trade, not only for this line and this by train, but also by other transportations. The transportation for the cargoes have increased a lot, and also still now is increasing, which is beneficial for all the Belt and Road lines countries. I think this is good, especially for those countries on the market side for the consumers. That's all for my talk today, and if you have any questions later on, I'm willing to answer. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sheng-Fu. You have kept your time very well. Again, I remind our audience that all the PowerPoint presentations can be downloaded. It's very difficult to see all the numbers on the slides on the screen, so please download it. Our next speaker will be Brett McKinnon. Brett is Executive Director of the International Wood Products Association, a role which he began in September. prior to joining IWPA, he served as Vice President for Economic Security and Operations at the Export-Import Bank of the United States and as Chief of Staff of the International Trade Administration at the U.S. Department of Commerce. Brett, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Barney and others. Can I just get a thumbs up if you can hear me okay?
Okay.
Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. Well, good morning. I want to thank Sheng Fu and Ivan, my other counterparts, for their presentations and remarks, which were very insightful. And I want to thank you and the chair for the time to present today. It's good to be with you all. I'm coming to you from Northern Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C. in the United States. So as Barney said, my name is Bradley McKinney. I'm with the International Wood Products Association based here in Northern Virginia. Next slide, please. Just a brief overview of my presentation. I want to tell you a little bit about IWPA, our mission, members, and priorities, and then outline a couple key economic factors that illustrate North American demand and some of the challenges we're facing. Next slide, please. So first, overview of IWPA. We are the leading North American trade association for the international wood products industry. We are the only U.S.-based trade association dedicated to the interests of wood importers. Our members include companies in North America, not just the U.S., but North America generally, that are importing wood from many of your countries. We also have overseas suppliers and producers as members, as well as service providers like insurance providers, ports, brokers, and others. Our core mission is to build acceptance and demand in North America for globally sourced wood products from sustainably managed forests. Next slide. Our core activities, like other trade associations, are to promote the products of our members. We also advocate with U.S. and foreign governments for fair trade policies and other policies. Pictured here is the cover of one of our recent issues of the International Wood magazine, where we feature many of the creative ways that globally sourced wood is used. We also have, that magazine is published one time annually. We also have an annual convention in the spring and a fall conference, we call it a fly-in, in Washington, where our members come and gather. These are critical networking opportunities for the industry, and we encourage you all to visit our website and explore whether attending might make sense for you, for your company, for your government. We also have a weekly e-news with valuable industry insights that staff sends out weekly. Next slide, please. I wanted to highlight one of our core functions as well, which is wood trade compliance training. As many of you know, in order to import wood, you must meet a number of requirements, including conducting due diligence, due care, according to the U.S. Lacey Act. We conduct training for companies, members and non-members, to help them with their wood trade compliance programs. Pictured here are some logos from a number of the offerings that we provide. We are currently building an online capability. We have done in-person trainings. And so I invite you to visit our website and look as we build out that offering to see if that might make sense for you, your companies, your governments. Next slide, please. We are committed to supporting the legal and sustainable harvesting of wood products from around the world. This is what guides our activity each and every day. I am new to this role. I just joined in September, so this is my first foray into the ITTO and ITTC world. So it's a special pleasure for me to be with you all for the first time. You may have probably knew well my predecessor, Cindy Squires. Cindy has been wonderful and has made the transition a very easy one. My priorities as the new executive director are as follows. Recruiting and retaining new members. We seek to grow our strength as an association and our influence. We seek to sustain the excellence in member service. This is the service that we provide to all of our members, which includes the government affairs we conduct on their behalf, as well as the training, which I mentioned. And finally, my third priority is to reinforce public affairs activity. This encompasses a number of things, not least of which is engaging in international forums such as this, and to work with all of you and your governments to facilitate an efficient wood trade around the globe. I have been waiting for the chance to tell the world about my priorities, so I'm pleased to have done so just now. I welcome any follow-up questions on those. Next slide, please. Okay, some of the key economic factors that I'll examine briefly here are U.S. GDP and the economy generally, North American demand, inflation, and some of the supply chain challenges. Next slide. U.S. real GDP increased 2.1% in Q3, just ended in September. It had increased 6.7 and 6.4 respectively in quarters 2 and 1. Real GDP is expected to rebound in the fourth quarter with about 6% growth expected. The forecast for U.S. GDP in 2021 is about 5.6%. The forecast for 2022 is about 4.3% growth. So clearly, this is healthy. This is indicative of a bounce back from COVID-related drawdowns on economic activity. The U.S. economy is now 1.4% larger than at the end of 2019, which is before the COVID-19 pandemic began. So if that gives you a good sense of where the U.S. economy is currently. Next slide, please. Demand for imported wood products in North America is very high. Some of the key indicators that suggest as much are home construction and home repairs and remodeling. The way to think about this is that many people in the U.S. and North America are working from home. At least many more people are working from home. That causes people to look around at the space they're using while they work from home, and has led to a number of home improvements. People improving their office space, buying wooden desks, paneling, other things. Others are moving from urban areas to non-urban areas, to new homes altogether, which has driven a lot of the new home construction, home purchases that we've seen. Furthermore, because of some of the improved economic activity and because of the labor market issues, wages are high and rising for Americans on the balance. Next slide, please. These are just a couple charts that illustrate what I just laid out for you. The top chart, you can see between last year and now, the dark blue line in the center it largely shows an upward trend in residential construction, which is homes. In the bottom chart, I direct your attention to the dotted red line, which shows the trend in wages and salaries for private industry workers, which, as you can see, is on the rise. Next slide, please. A little bit about inflation. U.S. annual inflation rate is 6.2%, which is the highest in over 30 years. This is the the consumer price index, which is the main indicator of inflation. It measures the average change over time in the prices paid by consumers for a basket of consumer goods and services. most notably energy and food, but also other goods and services. Inflation eats into consumer purchasing power and can lead to has led to rising costs for companies, which eats into margins and profitability if not kept in check. The Federal Reserve, which controls monetary policy in the U.S., recently announced that it will buy fewer bonds over time, which should take some of the rocket fuel out of the economy, but it may be a while before the Fed hikes interest rates, though there are some changes coming on that front. The president is expected to or has renominated our Fed chairman for another term, which may bring with that some of the same policies that led to our current situation. Next slide, please. Again, this is just a slide that shows year-over-year rise in inflation. It had largely been at or below 2% for many years. And as you can see in the year that ended in October, it is up significantly. Next slide, please. It is no secret to this group the challenges in global supply chains that we have all experienced. This, by and large, is the reason for any challenges related to sales of tropical hardwood lumber in North America. Shipments from numerous origin countries are delayed by things such as port congestion, reduced container ship service, a lack of containers, approval of export documents, and catch up from COVID-related sawmill shutdowns around the world. The low supply due to these supply chain challenges make it difficult to meet the high demand, which doesn't appear to be subsiding anytime soon. So inventories are low, lumber is hard to come by, which has caused a lot of companies to rethink their inventory strategies. The final bullet point on this slide is the White House Supply Chain Disruptions Task Force. President Biden and his administration have made it a priority to focus on supply chain disruptions and do all that they can to address the challenges. A couple things to that end are legislation that they are supporting and that we, the International Wood Products Association, are supporting. This is the Ocean Shipping Reform Act, which would do a number of marginal things, none of which alone would solve the issue, but nonetheless would help. These, I'm getting some feedback. Can you all hear me okay? Okay. The Ocean Shipping Reform Act would change things, some of the practices by shippers, such as demurrage, which are fees charged to importers, among others, and things of that nature. There's also a Drive Safe Act that would increase trucking capacity in the United States. IWPA is supporting that. Again, none of these bills would necessarily solve the supply chain challenges, but every little bit helps. Next slide, please. These are just a couple of charts that again illustrate on the left chart actually incorporates data from the right chart, but as you can see, sort of an upward trend in supply chain lag times, delivery times. In the left chart, clearly the trend is on the up, is rising rather, and the downward sloping line in the chart on the right is indicative of ever increasing delivery times from the time of purchase to the time of delivery, and that shows just how stark these supply chain delays are. Next slide. In conclusion, demand is high. North Americans, they want products that your countries provide, to be sure. but supply chain disruptions complicate meeting that demand. Inflation eats into purchasing power and profitability, but thankfully incomes and sales are strong. Inflation will continue to be a prominent theme in North American U.S. politics, particularly as we approach an election year next year, where that could be a key issue. The supply chain disruptions, as long as demand is as high as it is, will likely continue, which will challenge global value chains, which, to make my final point, makes cooperation between our countries and our associations and between the private sector and the public sector all the more important. Next slide. So finally, you can contact me directly. There is my email. I ask that you not all email me at once, but I endeavor to be responsive to you and welcome your outreach. And on the right, you can see, you can follow our activity on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Barney, Chair, I thank you very much for the time.
Thank you very much, Brett. Our next speaker is Benoit Job de Volley. He's the Director General of the ATIBT. He's a very modest man. He doesn't give me much information about himself. He says he lives in France, and the main influence of ATIBT is in the Congo Basin. Benoit, please.
Hello. Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Well,
we can hear you.
thank you, Barney. Thank you very much. Barney, maybe I could not give you more information because during the last month I was traveling a lot in Africa. I am Benoit Jobet Duval. I am the manager of ATIBT. ATIBT is an old association joining forestry companies and importers, mainly forestry companies in the Congo Basin and importers from Europe. But also we have some members in North America, some members in Vietnam, and we are working mainly to give value to the tropical forest all over the world. But of course, our means can allow us to focus mainly on Congo Basin. So we are present in Cameroon, in Congo, Republic of Congo, in Gabon, and in Europe. We are present in nearly every state. We have good relations with all the associations in Europe, but also the associations in Congo Basin. Well, since more than 20 years, the companies in Africa are working more and more seriously, mainly in Congo Basin, initiating the first management plan, and it's been 15 years ago since the first companies started to be certified. We have to admit that the model now is not very profitable and that it's not encouraged enough. So ATIBT objective is to help the sector in Central Africa to have more visibility, and we try to obtain for them more recognition on the markets. Next slide, please. In fact, as you know, tropical forestry is a difficult and complex profession that is currently going through great challenges in ever increasing numbers. Let's quickly go over what currently characterizes this sector, at least in Central Africa. But of course, the situation is not very different, I think, in other tropical basins. First of all, to describe the background, the diversity of species, harvestable species is very high. We have at least 150 species that could be harvestable. Today, we have only 15, 20 species being harvestable. So we needed to enlarge the possibilities to make feasible the harvest of more and more species. Our sector has a marginal place in the world timber production. We have only 1% of the world log production, and we have only 5% of the tropical log production. I am speaking for Central Africa. We have a fall in production coming in the second rotation for some species. As I said before, the first rotation began 25 years ago, and now we are arriving at the end of the first rotation. The second rotation of our companies will be much less quality, and the difficulties of new species is a very, very big challenge. So that's the future, the next future will be not very easy. In Central Africa, Okume is probably the most new species, the most known species. Even Okume has now maybe in some areas a quality of production that is less. So by the future we have to try to find more species to replace Okume if possible. In Congo Basin, we have limited industrialization. You know, there is now a project to ban the log exportation by the January 2024. The objective of this ban is to increase industrialization, but the situation could be more complex because we need investment, and also we need more training, professional training. Next slide, please. So, as I told before, we have the end of log export in 1 year. We have today also in Gabon new forest codes, forestry codes, and also it's the same situation in the Republic of Congo. The new forest code in the Republic of Congo was 18 months ago, but in Gabon, the new forest code is known for the last 2 weeks. So it's a very, very recent new. We are trying to work on this, and both new forestry codes include a new concept about the sharing production directly from the concessionaries. The concept of sharing production is a completely new concept. It's more or less the inspiration of the sharing production concept comes from the oil industry. All the countries producing oil are sharing the production with the states, and the states of Congo and Gabon now will try to repeat this sharing production concept to the logging. But it will be very complex because the different species, because the different diameters, because the different qualities of the logs. We are waiting for more information about this. New recent information is, of course, the new European Commission regulation to fight against imported deforestation. This new regulation includes the timber, and timber will be considered as all the commodities with rubber, alpine, soya, meat as a driver of deforestation. We are not completely okay with being included in the drivers of deforestation, but we understand also that we are the most experimented commodity because for the last 25 years, we are working on certification and on legality, and we can inspire other commodities in this new European regulation. Next slide, please. Well, today we have the objective of my presentation. We have many challenges. The first challenges we have are not only a challenge about visibility, about marketing, but I will focus my presentation on these challenges because we cannot speak today in 15 minutes about all the challenges of our sector. So I will speak mainly about the support of the international market for the sustainably managed tropical timber. I will speak about the continuation of action planned following the Shanghai Forum in 2019 regarding Chinese markets. And I will speak also about the access to domestic market for former industrialists and professionalization of independent professionals. I can nevertheless mention all the big challenges we have. First, to increase production by diversifying the harvested species, as I told before. To industrialize, to promote lesser known timber species. We need, of course, to improve logistics. My predecessor speaker spoke about logistics in Brazil. We have more or less the same situation in Central Africa. Another challenge is to change the tax system to improve the certification, to improve the legality. Another big challenge is the staff training. Another challenge is the strengthening forest and industry research. And of course, another challenge is to access to financing. Next slide, please. Well, concerning the market, the first challenge is the image. 1 year ago, the exclusion of tropical timber from the Paris 2024 Olympic Games was a major mistake, which illustrates the lack of understanding by politicians and public opinion about the importance of our sector. Can you imagine that for the Paris 2024 Olympic Games, we want to receive all the teams for all over the world, from America, from Asia, from Africa, from South America, etc. But we don't want in the building of the Paris Olympic Games village, we don't want tropical timber. Is it possible to imagine this? So as ATIBT, we are working very hard to fight against this situation, trying to convince the politicians in France and in Europe that this situation is unacceptable. So to succeed in this war, we need to make a good quality lobbying. So that's one of our major concerns today. Next slide, please. So how is possible to obtain this lobby? We have to accept that we have some limits speaking as European. I am French. I am speaking very frequently on French and European media. As a European, I am not credible enough to defend the tropical timber. So we need good speakers coming from Africa. Recently, we have a very positive reception during intervention by actors coming from Congo Basin. The credibility of advocacy by African for the protection of the forest is sure, and we have the opportunity to enrich our communication with those ambassadors. But which ambassadors? Next slide, please. In October, we invite ministers from Congo, Republic of Congo, Ms. Rosalie Matondo, and the Minister of Forest from Cameroon, Mr. Jules Doré Ndongo. And we could obtain a meeting with Paris Major team in order to discuss about the ban of tropical timber in Paris Olympic Games. We have not at this moment the clear response, but we cross fingers that we have the possibility to obtain a positive response after more than 1 year of writing letters and sending messages to Paris Olympic Games organization. Next slide, please. We have also another possibility to work more and more with embassies of the Congo Basin in Europe. As a first step, we establish good links with Embassy of Gabon in Paris, and Miss Liliane Massala, the ambassador, was very reactive, very interested to support us and to help us to improve the communication in the European markets. A possibility could be also to obtain more links with other embassies of Congo Basin in Europe, and maybe through the other importers association, we could obtain more contacts. But of course, I understand ambassadors must speak about the value of tropical legal timber in European markets. Next slide, please. We have another way to work with some people recognized representative of civil society. In Gabon, for example, we had an agreement with Edwige Yangefa. She's a researcher of the Institute of Research in Ecology in Libreville, and she's very, very close from FSC and PFC. In Congo Republic, we have Norbert Gamy. He's an anthropologist, and he's very close also from certified concessionaries. And we are very confident to work very close with Edwige and Norbert by the very next future to communicate directly with European market at least. Next slide, please. As ATIBT, we establish good relations with Malaysian Timber Council. As you know, Malaysian Timber Council is a very active organization promoting Malaysian timber all over the world. Malaysian Timber Council has some offices in Europe, in Rotterdam, and we are working together from now to fight against some cases like Paris Olympic Games decision. One important thing about the Paris Olympic Game decision is that we have, first of all, to avoid others initiative similar to this, because I understand it's the second time we have bad messages from European organization. Remember 2 years ago, the decision of Nordic Swan to ban also the tropical timber from the Nordic Swan. So with the Nordic Swan initiative and the Paris Olympic Games initiative, we have two major bad decisions that we have to fight against for the next month and for the next years. Next slide, please. Another point is to obtain and to support credible information for the European regulation. ITTO has updated the timber trade portal with the help of Form International very recently. The timber trade portal is one portal that combined with other portals like Open Timber Portal, for example, like Spot, for example, also, this portal could give good information for the UTR in Europe. So the last information about timber trade portal is we have now in 2021 a new website. We have 29 country profiles of producing countries. We will have 3 languages, English, French, and now Chinese. We have good resources about certification and regulation. We need also to link this portal with the other portals I mentioned before. And of course, in this portal, you will find new items. Next slide, please. About markets, I continue to speak about the challenges on the markets. And I want to mention the importance of Chinese market. If we are speaking about the Congo Basin, the Chinese market is importing 50% more or less from the timber exported from the Congo Basin. So to obtain a good recognition of legality and certification in Chinese market is extremely important. We have to remember that 2 years ago, we had the Shanghai Forum in China, and the main decisions of the Shanghai Forum organized with ITTO was first, the develop a collaboration with a GGSC platform in China. We had to build a database of information accessible to all, including the existing global timber traceability network. We have to integrate existing legality and sustainability verification mechanisms into existing global rules and legal framework. And we have to develop B2B communication and information with members of GGSC network and other Chinese organizations, for example, like the CTWPDA. Next slide, please. About the market, it's the third message that we have to think about and to develop is the local market in Africa. Today, there is a big difference between the production of certified companies in Central Africa, legal and certified companies in Central Africa, which are focused mainly on exports. And the local market is not in touch with the big forestry companies working for sustainable timber production. So we have many measures to envisage, but this is a major challenge for the future, to connect local market in Central Africa with the formal companies working in Central Africa. We have different possibilities and many possibilities, many challenges. First, to intensify vocational training for craftsmen and very small companies in Central Africa. Today, this sector of these craftsmen and very small companies are mainly buying to informal market. We have to reduce taxes like VAT, because small companies cannot recover the VAT, the add value tax when they consume market timber from the companies. So they cannot recover the VAT, so it's necessary to make easier for them to recover the VAT. We have to encourage public procurement by producer countries to buy legal and sustainable managed wood. For example, we need public policies, clear public policies encouraging the public procurement. And I want to give you an example. In Central Africa, all the funeral parlors are a department, a government department. It's an official service from the states. All the coffins in Congo Basin are made from illegal timber. So the first step, for example, to consume sustainable wood in Central Africa could be to decide in this government service of funeral parlor to consume only legal wood to produce coffins, for example, but there are many other examples. Next slide, please. More measures that could be possible is to take advantage of current decisions on production sharing to supply the local market. Why not connect large and small companies with wood sales technology transfers? We have to encourage big companies to have more contacts with small companies. We have to help the small community forest by the big companies and connect the community forest with big companies to make easier the certification for the community forest. You know, the community forests are mainly in touch with local markets. So we need to make easier the certification, the legality certification of this community forest. And of course, we have to promote lesser known timber species for local markets. Next slide, please. I am arriving to the end of my presentation. We don't need to, we have to remember all the big challenges of the sector of forestry in Congo Basin. So we need to increase production by diversifying the harvested species. I spoke before. We have to industrialize to promote lesser known timber species. We have to improve logistics. We have to change the tax system. We have to promote the professional training. we have to strengthen forest and industry research, and we have also to access to financing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Benoit. I'd like to call the next speaker, Ernie Ko. Ernie is the chairman of the ASEAN Furniture Forest Industries Council. Ernie is currently the executive director of CODA, which is the leading original design manufacturer of furniture based in Singapore. He has 25 years of experience in marketing and customers spread over 40 countries. Ernie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Barney. Thank you. Thanks again, ITTO, for inviting me for the market discussion. The panel speakers before me has a lot of interesting information that I'm learning as we speak. As Barney says, I'm the executive director of CODA, a public listed company based in Singapore, and we have manufacturing in Malaysia and in Vietnam. So today's speech, next slide, please. I'm coming from a perspective of a furniture industry, that means woodworking furniture industry. And I would like to, the challenges in ASEAN, I will put it in a chronological order since the pandemic started in 2019 until today. Next slide, please. But before I start, I'd like to give you a brief introduction to AFIC. AFIC is established in 1978, quite long ago. It means it's an ASEAN Furniture Industry Council. The ASEAN has got 10 members, of which 8 are in the AFIC community. And one of the 15 business organizations is engaged with ASEAN, and the only one that is dealing with furniture. Next slide, please. The members, to be in the members, it has to be an association that is endorsed by the respective Chamber of Commerce and Industry, or you can be an affiliated member. That not necessary to be industry related. Next slide, please. So these are the 8 member countries. The Brunei, which is a very small country, as well as Cambodia at the moment is not in the member. Next slide, please. So I just took over as the chairman of AFIC this year. Philippines was the previous chairmanship, and this year is Singapore. And the Secretary General and also the members and the Secretary team is all from Singapore. Next slide, please. To give you an overview of the furniture industry in a global market, it will hit 718 billion by 2025. And over since 20 to the next 5 years, it will have a growth of about 5%. Next slide, please. In perspective of the ASEAN with respect to the global furniture industry, the 5% growth is driven mainly by e-commerce and also the raising of upper and middle class in Asia, including China, and also the increase in US and Europe via sourcing more from Asia besides China. And ASEAN at the moment stands about 10% of the global furniture market is exported from, is produced in ASEAN. And within ASEAN, there's a big growth in furniture because of the rapid urbanization and the raising affluence of the consumer. And the woodworking market size is targeted to grow at 4.2% and expected to reach $268 billion by 2025. So you can see from the global market, it takes up the wood furniture takes up a big part of the whole global furniture market. Next slide, please. Okay, I do not have information of every country. But I'm taking the Vietnam perspective from January 2020 to September 2021. I think most country, the pattern of export, it is about there. So you compare last year to this year, the dark green is last year and the white is this year. There is a surge in global export in Vietnam and also in Indonesia and in Malaysia because of the global demand, high demand in furniture all over the world. For Vietnam, in the exception of August and September, it performed less than last year is because there was a nation shutdown in the month of August and September in Vietnam. In Malaysia, it was shut down, I think, May and June. So the pattern of export, you will see the reduction because of the country shutdown due to pandemic. Next slide, please. Okay, let me go through the chronological order of what happened during the pandemic. When it first started, the whole ASEAN nation, many countries fear that the market will have a lockdown. So many factories are reducing their production capacity for fear of customer cancelling orders. Actually, some customers actually in a short term do cancel order and some request for delay. So the mode that as manufacturers goes into, we went into the survival mode. We take care of, try to break even and not lose money. So this is the first stage when the pandemic hits. Next slide, please. As we go along, the second stage is between March and December last year. There was the slowdown in global demand did not happen. Actually, there was a huge increase in demand because of people staying at home. As Bradley says, more people are staying at home rather than going to work, and they start buying a lot of furniture and then remodel their house. But in the early part of 2020, ASEAN was partially locked down, but Vietnam was still doing very well. As I say, the global furniture demand, especially for garden and home furniture, shot through the roof. Factories are managing output and allocating to customers. Many of our customers are not happy at all because we can't supply enough for them. Having said that, our margin is squeezed because material costs starts going up. As I think Ivan mentioned, that the raw material from generally went up, and we had one round of price increase, I think, in most of the ASEAN factories because we are not able to cope with the material cost increase. Next slide, please. Now comes beginning of this year until May. From the global demand that we were dealing with, we end up, this is the time that we have to manage the logistics. Again, Ivan and Shen Fu was mentioning that the price of a container went up literally 10 times. But if we can get a container at all. So before this, we already ramp up our manufacturing, but we are not able to ship during this time. So a lot of factories literally either rent warehouse to continue to produce and wait for custom containers, or some of us shut down the factories for a certain period of time or reduce our output because we are not able to ship due to lack of containers. Next slide, please. Comes May to August is where the Asia, a lot of countries, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Vietnam, we can't control the Delta variant when it hits the country. So we are not able to control the spread, and as a result, there's not enough vaccination to go around, and the vaccination that went around is not fast enough. So there was a lockdown during this period on many countries in ASEAN. Having said that, the demand is still very high. So with a high demand and lack of supply, then we are in a situation where there are a lot of unhappy customers. I think many of the Americans customers know that. I think Bradley can attest to that. That many of the shelves are empty over Christmas, and I think because of the difficulty in logistics to move goods from China and from ASEAN to the Europe and US. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide is an interesting slide. This slide, it is just very recent. The countries that had a lockdown ramp up their vaccination, and they are changing from managing COVID to living with COVID. In fact, in Vietnam, as we speak, many of the industrial park on a daily basis has got multiple COVID cases, including my factory. But they are not taken to quarantine and all. They have they manage it by staying at home for 7 days and then a negative test, and they're back to work. At this time, I think many of the factories are not in full capacity yet, because there are many cases that staying at home quarantine. At the same time, the demand is still very high, but workers are not back. However, material costs continue to increase. So now is a discussion. Many of the producers are considering a price increase. But having said that, because of the high logistic costs to transport the goods, finished goods to their market, it is not easy to increase the prices, causing a lot of inflationary pressure in the markets that we sell to. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the slide where I am predicting. Don't hold me up to it, but then I think this is a period of uncertainty and anxiety. With the new case of Omicron, nobody is going to know what happened over the next week or so. But the question I have for myself is, will freight continue to increase? I think many of the speakers before me predicted yes, it will continue until 2022. My feeling is yes, at least 2022. Will material costs continue to increase? As long as freight is increasing, I think material costs will not decrease. It will continue to go up, and as long as demand is continue to grow or continue to hold up, the material costs will increase because of the availability to move goods, materials around. Will we have to increase consumer price again as a result of even higher inflationary costs? My thinking is yes. Many manufacturers in ASEAN are producing but not making money because of the cost pressure. Next, please. So what's next? What's next if the market continue to be this way? Will resourcing to countries nearer to the market happen? I see a lot of my big customers are going into, like American customers are going to Mexico and South America to look for new suppliers, and European are going into Poland. So what Ivan mentioned with regards to the domestic market of timber, it may be not domestic, but the regionalization rather than globalization of the market. And I think when the pandemic is over or stabilized, many of this may stay. that many of the resilience, the supply chain resilience, many of the people will have to think whether to source it globally is a wise decision, or we need to go into more regionalization in a matter of the supply chain management. Will we have a global downturn? This one I can't answer, but in the furniture industry, we feel that there will be a demand tapering off, leveling off, because people starts to travel, and many of the people that were staying at home will start traveling and putting their money somewhere else besides the home. A new COVID variant, I wrote this 3 weeks ago. Now it's happening. Nobody knows what's going to happen in the next few days. And the question of what's the new norm and when is the norm is a big, and I don't think the norm will be what it was pre-COVID. The material price may level off, but level off to which level is a big question. Do we have to readjust the price if there is a global slowdown? And as competition start increasing and start, when the markets slow down, when competition steps in, what's going to happen next? All this question is, I think, in many people's mind, and I think in businesses, we may have to pivot to certain decision of all this before we create competitive advantage within our business. Next slide, please. This is my last slide. I don't know how to answer this question. It's always in my mind. What are the opportunities? As I say, many businesses will take this situation to create an opportunity and pivot it maybe towards sustainability as one of the competitive advantage, or towards regionalization rather than globalization. And my question is, what's going to happen to China? As Shen Fu mentioned, they are doing a lot of things happening in China, but China COVID policy is very different from the rest of the world. China is still adopting the zero tolerance policy, and the rest of the world are using the managing of COVID. So when are they going to open up, and how is it going to be managed? It's a big question mark for me. Thank you very much. This is my last slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Ernie. That was excellent. Now I will call on the next speaker, Pak Sigit. Sigit Pramono is a senior policy analyst at the Directorate General for Sustainable Forest Management in the Ministry of Forestry of the Republic of Indonesia. Mr. Pramono formerly was a chief of the Flag T Licensing Information Unit of the Ministry of Environment and Forestry, as well as a focal point for Flag T VPA between Indonesia and the European Union. Most of his services at the ministry have been in relation with development of standards in forestry and development and implementation of the Indonesian Timber Legality Assurance System, which we all know as TILAS, or the SVLK in Indonesian language, as well as development and implementation of FLEGT VPA between Indonesia and Europe. Pak Sigit is actually using Agus Justiano's account, so please ignore the name for this presentation. It's Pak Sigit. Thank you, Pak.
Thank you very much, Pak Barney, for the introduction. Can you hear my voice over there, Pak?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Also, thank you for the ITTO and ITTC for having me here And of course, special thanks to my BG, Dr. Agus Susianto, for allowing me to speak at this market dialogue. Also, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all participants of this market dialogue all over the world. I'm sharing, among other, with regard to impact of COVID-19 pandemic to exports of Indonesian timber products, some challenges faced by the business sector, and also policy of the government during the pandemic, and some brief information on the progress implementation of the SVLK and also Black PVPA with the partners. Next, please. Yes, SVLK is an assurance system to verify and to certify that timber and timber products coming from legally harvested and sustainably managed forests. Development and implementation have been through multi-stakeholder process. Verification is carried out by accredited independent third party, and monitoring is carried out by consortium of GSOs. Indonesia has a long journey since 2001 to develop TILAS to cope with the issue of illegal logging and associated trade. Then after around 10 years development of the SVLK, Indonesia started to implement TILAS mandatorily since 2009. Under the framework of Black PVPA, the SVLK has been accepted and recognized as instrument to verify legality timber products exported to EU and UK territories. SVLK also apply legality assurance for exports to all country of destinations. SVLK legal basis has been strengthened toward legality and sustainability within multi-business forest management, and then a new logo was launched in the margin of COP26 in Glasgow earlier this month. Next, please. Verification under SVLK range from upstream in the forest to downstream in the industries and marketplace. SVLK has been equipped with online platform of timber administration to support for traceability, and SILK or SVLK information system for flexi licensing and due diligence process for imported timber. Under the new Act 11/2020 and its derivative law and regulation, the system on the term of SVLK has been transformed to become sistem verifikasi legalitas and kelestarian or verification system for legality and sustainability from the previous term of sistem verifikasi legalitas kayu or timber legality verification system. Next, please. By October 2021, SVLK has certified more than 5,600 of 5,600 forest and wood-based industries, and then nearly 30 million hectares of state production forest has also been certified under the SVLK. Then since 2013, the online SILK platform has issued more than 1.5 million fee legal documents, including the FLECT licenses to support timber product exports to nearly 200 countries and economies all over the world. We can see here that export of SVLK certified timber has been increased nearly 87% within 9 years of period since 2013. Next, please. Following the issuance of the Act, there have been some development on the SVLK scheme, including reiteration of sustainability aspect in the regulations or at higher law and regulation. And then we also strengthen due diligence procedure for imported timber and also adding an umbrella regulation for non-timber forest products in regard to recent policies on multi-business forest utilization and also in anticipation to the global concern on forest and ecosystem risk commodities. Indonesia has also been implementing green public procurement process in the domestic market. Indonesia is also reviewing and streamlining procedure and requirement for verification process, including development of a remote audit in conjunction to the COVID-19 pandemic. On flexi licensing, Indonesia is working on a piloting program with EU towards the use of full electronic licensing to allow for removing the use of bulky paper-based licenses. Then the full electronic licensing will help to reduce workloads and errors, improve control and coordination, and enable real-time data reconciliation. Next slide, please. Then we can see here that export destination mostly are countries with legal wood trade regulations such as USA, EU, UK, Australia, Japan, Korea, etc. Then the SVLK certification and flexi licensing has helped the business sector to maintain and improve their access to those regulated markets. In the left chart, we can see that the exports has been increasing, but during the COVID-19 pandemic, exports in 2020 decreased by roughly 5%. After that, export in 2021 is getting stronger, and by October 2021, total export has exceeded export in the period of 2020. And then by end of December 2021, hopefully that it will reach around $13 billion. This means an increase by 17.6% compared to the exports during the pandemic, or even an increase by 12% compared to the export in 2019 before the pandemic. This is with regard to the policy intervention carried out by the government. Next slide. We can see that we did some exercise of export data from the world export. We extracted the data from TradeMap.org with the findings that world export for wood-based products since 2016 showed an increasing trend until 2019 and decreased in 2020 due to COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic brought negative impact to world's export of wood products by 3.7%. In 2020, the pandemic impacted exports of almost all products. For its code 44, 47, 48, and 940690, except for furniture and parts of furniture. During the pandemic, exports of furniture and parts of furniture still increased by 3%. The pandemic also brought negative impact to Indonesia's export of wood-based products by 4.9%. Portion of Indonesia's exports to the world exports also have been relatively small, yet it is increasing. In 2020, the pandemic also decreased set of Indonesian export to the world exports by roughly 0.03. In the next slide, we can see that export of timber products from Indonesia were severely impacted by the COVID-19. Year-on-year comparison showed that for the second quarter, the export dropped to minus 8.4%. During the second quarter of 2020, exports were at the lowest point. This is among other due to the lockdown in many countries of destination. After May 2020, exports have shown an increasing trend until now. In early 2020, demands from major importing countries such as China, USA, and EU remain strong, yet the only constraint were the availability of logistics, which is the containers. To cope with this situation, some exporters to USA, Canada apply such a so-called break bulk cargo. In the next slide, we can see here that to help the business sector, the government of Indonesia released some policies, including reduction of value-added tax for raw material from 10% to less than 1%, reduction of export tariff for veneer from 15 to 5%, and also some policies to allow for players to reschedule obligation to pay reforestation fee levies, land and property tax, loans, etc. Another policy issued was to implement multi-business forest utilization to extend the scope of permits beyond timber. Here is for producing non-timber forest products, environmental services, for carbon economic value, etc. The government of Indonesia also simplified procedure on issuance of new permits, including through online submission. During the pandemic, the government of Indonesia also developed programs to help recovering the economy and maintain the resilience of the community. The Minister of Environment and Forestry implemented a program to provide job opportunity through mangrove planting by community equally to nearly 1.3 million mandates. The ministry also implemented social forestry program to give access for more than 900,000 families to manage state forests by nearly 4.4 million hectares. The community were also supported with tools for producing non-timber forest products to allow for production increase by 44.2% in the year after, which is 2021. In the next slide, we can see that with regard to exports to VPA partners, which is EU and UK, during the pandemic, we can see that exports from Indonesia to EU and UK in 2020 decreased by nearly 19%. Despite the increased value to some EU member countries, exports decreased to some major countries such as UK, Germany, Netherlands, Belgium, and others. The biggest decrease were exports to UK and Spain by around 45%, to Germany, Italy, and France by nearly 30%, and to the Netherlands and Belgium by around 15%. Compared to export in 2020, exports to EU and UK in 2021 up to October showed a significant increase by 37%. Export during the period were also stronger by 11% compared to export in the same period in 2019 before the pandemic. In the next slide, we can see also that we exercise the export based on the country of destination, origin of destination, and also based on the product category. During 2021, only exports to North America and Oceania was remain strong and still increased by 10% and 7% respectively. Further exercise showed that exports to North America were dominated by furniture, by paper products, panels, and woodworkings. Yet only exports of furniture and panels that grew significantly or increased significantly by 18.9% and 48% respectively. Meanwhile, export to Oceania were dominated by woodworking, paper products, panels, and furniture, and only export of woodworking and paper products that increased by 23.8 and 0.9 respectively. Based on the product category, as in the case on the world exports, exports from Indonesia in 2020 also decreased for almost all types of products, except for furniture that remain increased by 5.5%. In 2021, by October, exports to all destinations is increasing by 23.8%. Compared to the exports in the same period in 2020, the biggest increase has been to North America, which dominated by furniture, panels, and woodworking. Only export to South America is still decreasing by 6.4%, yet the value is not very significant. Meanwhile, export to other regions is increasing by 10 to 18%. Based on the product category, export in 2021 for all types of product are increasing except for prefabricated building element. Exports of panel, furniture, veneer, and pulps are also increasing with percentage range from 10 to 30%. In the next slide, we can see here that basically we learned that SVLK helps Indonesia to regain market's confidence. SVLK certification helps to maintain access at global level due to the growing number of regulated markets. COVID-19 pandemic bring negative impact to the performance of world exports and Indonesia export on timber product. Export of some products, in particular furniture, has remained strong during the COVID-19 pandemic. Some policy intervention has helped Indonesia to recover from the pandemic and even surpass performance in exports before the pandemic. Despite the success to cope with the pandemic, some challenges has remained with regard to cost for verification and certification process, mainly for small medium enterprises, and also the availability of logistics, even though demand is getting strong. Some licensing issues to delay release of export in ports of destination, in particular with regard to different interpretation of HS codes, some data discrepancy in document of export, and so on. And also, the business sector face the additional requirement on voluntary scheme in some particular market niches, which cause extra costs for certification. This could be due to limited information upon the black tea licensing and the SVLK certification scheme, in particular with regard to sustainability aspect. And also, portion of Indonesian export to imports of VPA partners in EU and UK has been relatively very small, or less than 2%, in particular for EU import. This may relate to internal policy on procurement in VPA partners, and also could be due to impression upon Indonesian timber product, for example, with regard to furniture as a bulky and not up to date in design and the models. Next, please. And then to cope with the challenges, we will continue to work on some issues, including maintaining and improving communication with authorities in destination countries for prompt release of consignments, to share information on technical issue, new policies, and so on. And also exercise some options on logistic aspects, including development of such integrated storage at ports of destination. We will accordingly revise SVLK scheme to strengthen the sustainability aspect and adapt to market concern on extension of due diligence for forest and ecosystem risk commodities. And also, we will continue the support program on SVLK certification for SMEs, and also implement effective promotion strategy with regard to SVLK rebranding on the sustainability aspect. We will also continue to carry out capacity building for business players on market intelligence, product design, and diversification to capture consumers' preference. And also, we will continue to exercise combined audit of voluntary and mandatory scheme to help reducing cost of certification. And also continue for piloting for full electronic black tea licensing. And Indonesia also need to collaborate further with demand side to encourage for market incentives. In this particular, I'm in a view personally that ITTO might help in the formulation of such possible incentive or a fair mechanism for sharing burden between producers and consumers on cost for certification. That's all for my presentation, and I'm happy to take some questions, and then I hand over the floor back to moderator Pak Bani Chan, and thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you.
Terima kasih, Pak Angus. We will now come to our last speaker, Dr. Hoffman. Hopefully, he can tell us where are all the shipping containers we're looking for. Jan Hoffman,
Yes.
He's the chief in the trade logistics branch, division on technology and logistics in UNTEC. The branch is implementing multilateral transport and trade facilitation capacity building programs, as well as regional and national projects in Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. Jan knows well the day-to-day logistics activities which he monitors in order to produce the annual UNTEC review of maritime transport. He also edits a few quarterly magazines which is produced by his branch. Jan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I trust the sound and visual all works. Yeah, we have already learned a lot about the shipping container crisis, very practical issues. So I will go relatively quickly through some key messages from our just about launched review of maritime transport, and then focus on something rather difficult, which is the future. Next, please. So we look in great detail at trends in demand. There's 10.7 billion tons of seaborne trade. We look at the geography of trade. If you look at the red line here, that goes up to 70%. This is the share of developing countries in the volume of goods unloaded. And you really see a big change in the geography of trade, where today developing countries are not just exporters of raw materials, but increasingly participate in globalized production. And on the right, you see the share of different regions, with Asia being the biggest player in seaborne trade. Next. On the supply side, we have all the data on 99,800 ships, the fleet growth, the age profile, and ship deliveries. Overall, currently, the shipping cycle is actually at a rather low point. If we look at the order book of how many ships are about to be built, and because it takes time to build, we will come back to this when we look at the future. Next. Then we have a lot of analysis of this topic of the supply chain crisis, of the freight rates that go up and down, or mostly up recently. I wanted to draw your attention to a table, and you have the file, you have the presentation for the small print, but we are quite proud to include for the first time also freight rates based on confidential contracts, because most transport of containerized goods is done in confidential freight rates. And here, through collaboration with Tim Consult, who works with a number of major shippers, we get this data, and overall it all makes sense. We can see the efficiency of different regions. We can see the imbalances, how this has an impact, the impact of distance. So this is a new data set I wanted to draw your attention to. Next. When it comes to explaining what really, what explains those differences in freight rates, we have an interesting assessment that shows how better port infrastructure helps reduce freight rates. Better trade facilitation helps reduce freight rates. And more competition, better shipping connectivity also helps reduce freight rates. Next. Now here's the picture that we have seen in different versions, formats. This really historical surge in freight rates on all routes, not only those that go through the Suez Canal, or not only those that are confronted with the waiting ships and congestion in the west coast of North America, but it shows how globalized shipping is. Next. So I want to share with you 6 reasons about the future, which is always risky because you can prove me wrong next year or in 2 years. But I believe there are 6 reasons why freight rates are likely to remain higher than over the previous decade before they went up. Next. The first one is, of course, COVID is not yet over. I don't need to remind you of latest variants and new restrictions. And I mean, it's still ongoing. And even if it were over, the fact that we need to strengthen social distancing and have more controls, there are certain things that lead to a slowdown. Typical container ship in COVID times spends 12% longer in port than pre-COVID times. This is some of the data. So this is still to continue into next year or even longer. Next. Then there is the shipping cycle I already alluded to, where you see the order book. These are absolute numbers for different ship types. And you see how these have gone down. If you were to put this in percent of the existing fleet, it would be even stronger, this downturn. And if now finally ships are being ordered, there's a problem that it takes time that these ships are built. Next. Then there is, of course, the process of consolidation. Many in the room, I believe, are more users, they are clients of shipping lines, and you have observed that there has been a process of concentration. Ships get bigger, but the choice, the competition is going down. Next. Now, I would still, under this point of consolidation, I would be careful not to blame the alliances or the mergers or the concentration on the current high level globally of high freight rates, because we have had other shipping markets, dry bulk, tankers, LNG, where we have also seen in the past big surges, which is simply a result of a demand-supply imbalance. Next. In the longer term, the biggest challenge for the shipping industry is the decarbonization. This is like going from sail to steam or from steam to oil. It will take a lot of time. And during the transition, there will be additional costs while we have to invest and make alternative fuels more competitive. Next. Right. So what is happening here is the energy transition, the transport costs will increase and speed will decrease, at least in the short to medium term, because this is the easiest way to reduce emissions with existing ships. So if you combine lower speeds, higher cost, maritime logistics costs will go up. Next. So this then leads me to my fifth point. Will we have enough ships? And this is really a concern, that we need more ships if we go slower. Yeah. For the same trade, if you go 10% slower, you need 10% more ships. But at the same time, the uncertainty in the global regulatory environment, what energy will be used, what will be the price of carbon, is normally encouraging investors to wait, to hold with their investments. So this leads to a shift of the supply curve to the left. Next. So seeing this increased volatility in normal economics leads to a higher risk premium. So even if there's no underlying change, even if there were no underlying change, just more volatility would normally lead to a slightly higher risk premium for investors and for prices, which is also something now with this new situation and COVID and possible trade wars and supply chain crisis, that also makes me expect freight rates tend to have a tendency towards being higher than before. Next. So what does all this mean for different products, different prices? First, the different freight rates, of course, have a different bearing on different products. If you have a very low value good, like high volume, low value, then a high freight rate has a strong impact. And the example most often given here is high volume furniture, which tends to be not that expensive, made of wood. Yeah? And so there the freight rate has a negative impact. Other products where we see this impact are products that have a lot of inputs from all over the world. So even though for a smartphone, the freight rate may not be very high, to produce the smartphone, you have to move a lot of things all over the globe. And in the end, the high freight rates do have a strong impact on the price also of the smartphone. And these higher prices, depending on where you are, what you trade, how much you trade, have different impacts. And this chart here, these numbers, were the ones most quoted from our review. They were in the Financial Times, Bloomberg, Reuters, hundreds, thousands of national, regional press, the impact on prices. So these are additional increases in consumer prices. We have all seen the news recently that inflation is going up. And here's our simulation, the contribution of higher freight rates to consumer prices, strongest in SIDS. SIDS stands for Small Island Developing States. They will be most negatively affected. Next. So with this, I thank you. I conclude this presentation and am open if we still have time for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Okay, we have had 7 very good presentations. You might have some questions. Please ask for the floor. And for those who are watching on YouTube, you can email me your questions. There are 2 requests for the floor, but let's give it a few more minutes. I'm not sure how this is working. I saw a name come up and pop away and disappeared. So let us start the Q&A, and you can still request for the floor as we go along. The first speaker I'll call on is Jorge. Jorge, por favor.
Muy buenos días.
Good day. Thank you very much. Thank you, Barney. We've had an excellent panel and excellent presentations today during this market discussion. So we've had several sessions of market discussion during different council sessions. And we have always then seen what the problems are in the tropical timber market. And now we've had very concrete data on the impact that the pandemic has had on the international timber trade, tropical timber trade market. But there's some lessons to be learned, too, from this situation. We're not free from the pandemic yet, and you never know. A similar type of situation might reoccur in the future. It might not just be a health crisis. However, in the future, there might be a different type of crisis which will affect economies at international level. One of the most serious problems is the significant increase in the transport cost. And transport costs have to do with volume and weight to a large extent. There have been an increase in the price of raw materials too used in the timber industry. There has been an increase in tariffs and rates. In ITTO, we deal with sustainable forest management of tropical forests, as you know. And we have to see how these aspects, what sort of an impact they have or could have in the next few months or years on the sustainable management of tropical forests, how all these problems, these high costs, high rates, what sort of an impact they could have on production, really, and the management, the way in which the forest is managed. What about profitability? Will it be profitable to sustainably manage the forest? If that is not the case, it loses value. The forest loses value, and there is an increase in deforestation and perhaps illegal logging. So there are lessons to be learned, I repeat. How can we reconcile all these difficulties that we seem to be facing in order to ensure that our forest management becomes ever more efficient? In previous sessions, we have seen that it might be possible and it might even be necessary to further develop local markets. And there's the problem of production, trade, in the market of tropical timber, and we've seen here how exports have been hit. But we have to try and develop local markets, I repeat. And that would help, I think, improve the living conditions of the local population. It would help improve their housing. It would generate more jobs. It would encourage technological development. It would help with education, etc., etc. So it would be like a cascade, really, which would produce benefits in all sorts of areas, but we need critical mass in production, critical mass of volume and quality of production. That's one lesson to be learned. Another lesson to be learned is that we need added value, and that is urgent. Raw materials or products from raw materials of tropical forests are not really that profitable, and they really affect the best management possible of the forest. So we have to focus on developing technologies to provide added value to production, and we need higher volumes too, which hopefully will help the situation and will help improve the situation in the transport sector. Congratulations to all the members of the panel and all those that made a presentation. They have all been excellent. Thank you very much indeed. Many lessons to be learned then, but lots of unknowns, sirs. Thank you, Barney, and congratulations again for your excellent moderation of this market discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Jorge. Peru, please.
Buenos días, Barney.
Good morning, Barney. First, I would like to congratulate everyone. We have really seen a very good presentation of what markets are like at the moment. I'm very worried about the freight rate increased. When we see it's gone up by multiplied by 10, that means that tropical products will have more and more restrictions in the international markets. Maybe the ITTO must focus on trying to find out which kind of products could be included in the international markets. Maybe we should try to really think and focus on products. This is one of my main worries, and I would like to ask the ITTO for its 2022 program to try to carry out this kind of analysis. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Peru. I have been instructed by the Secretariat that we are running out of time, so we'll take the last intervention. USA, Alicia, please.
Yes, thank you, Barney, and hello, everybody. First of all, the United States would like to recognize that this annual market discussion is a great example of one of the important contributions that ITTO is making to the tropical forest sector, and it also demonstrates the opportunity for us to engage with the private sector. And so for that, we thank you, TAG, for this annual market discussion. And thank you to all the speakers. It was an extremely interesting set of presentations. As the speakers made clear, the impacts of the pandemic made clear that the supply chains are critical to the well-being of our economies. And you know, and we are facing many, many challenges. Also, really admire the adaptability and resilience of the private sector to adapt during all kinds of challenges, extraordinary circumstances. In the United States, you know, we're dealing with a large problem with the ports, and in particular also a lack of truck drivers, which are extremely important to our supply chains. And fortunately, the recently passed Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is going to be enable us to make important contributions to some supply chain improvements involving billions of dollars of investments to improve highways, bridges, ports, and airports, and as well as other investments in connectivity, et cetera. But it also hopefully will be addressing the shortage of truck drivers in the United States that we're currently experiencing, including funds for driver apprenticeship programs and a new board aimed at increasing women in trucking. So, you know, it was very interesting to see, for example, all the different programs and measures that countries have taken on the producer side as well to offer relief for the sector. Indonesia's Sigit gave a very impressive list of measures Indonesia had taken, both to address the diversity of our sector, you know, both at the community level for relief there, but also for forest industry. I don't think we have time to address this question now, but of course it's very interesting to us to hear from the private sector at some point which of these government programs and actions have been of the greatest help since the beginning of the pandemic. I know there's a number of them and they're addressed to diverse audiences, but perhaps to keep that in mind as we continue to interact with the private sector. So thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you, Alicia. We are actually running out of time tonight. However, I am sure the Indonesians, especially the private sector, would be more than happy to interact with the US delegation in future ITTO sessions. So it's my duty now as moderator to thank all the speakers, all 7 speakers. I thank the team which works very hard behind the script, behind the scene. These are the people in Yokohama. I thank all the interpreters. And before we end this session, it is my duty, my very pleasant duty, to read out the trade statement. The trade statement is prepared with the inputs from the entire group, the trade advisory group. So it calls into focus some of the issues which our producers are facing and also the consumers are facing. So with your, I'll draw your attention to this, that this statement will also be uploaded into the ITTO website, which you can download and read. Okay. So with your permission, I will read out the statement. Chairman Karudin, ladies and gentlemen, no, it is not business as usual. The worldwide COVID-19 pandemic hit the tropical timber trade badly, both in the ITTO consumer and producer countries. As the virus cases escalated from early 2020, many countries went into various levels of lockdowns, which created very different challenges for consumers and producers. The worst of the pandemic is over in the consumer countries, and business is growing. Members of the European Timber Trade Federation, ETTF, report strong businesses in both the northern and southern European countries. As business activity improved, prices and turnover rose strongly until the market suffered a shortage of products. Demand in the home improvement and DIY sectors were good in 2020, though not as good so far this year. However, wholesale was strong in both 2020 and 2021. Imports were quite good, but suffered from severe disruptions in the supply chain. In contrast to the recovery in the consumer countries, most tropical producer countries are still battling the virus. Manufacturers suffer from a lack of raw material, not only raw timber, because no logging was taking place, but also a lack of imported material. Manufacturing was badly hit when workers were laid off, driving many to go back to the rural homes, thus creating labor shortage for the manufacturers. Moreover, in some countries, foreign workers are kept away because of closed borders. Shipping continues to be a major problem. Even as demand pick up, exports of finished products face problems of shipping, both in terms of availability of containers and the high ocean freight charges. Shipping containers are still scarce in some regions. Some ports, like Los Angeles in the US, have ships in long queues waiting to berth, to discharge, or to pick up. All these disruptions added up and resulted in higher production costs, which have fed into prices for the buying public. Allow me to illustrate these problems by looking at the example presented by Vietnam, one of the top players in timber trading. Vietnam imports timber raw material from 110 countries and exports wood products to 140 countries. As one example of increasing production costs, prices of timber from the US alone have gone up 20–30%. Container sea freight from Vietnam to North America and some European ports went from $2,400, $4,000 US per box in the pre-COVID times to US $15,000 to $18,000 per box, some even as high as $20,000 in late 2021. Such outrageous increases understandably boosted speculations of price abuses by shipping companies. This is the reality faced by Vietnam. It is by no means unique to that country. ITTO producers face the same scenario in varying degrees. However, these severe disruptions to our supply chain also present opportunities for us all, including our organization, ITTO, to rethink about utilization of recycled timber, timber from rehabilitated forests, young timber from plantations. All these materials need significant R&D to come up with new engineered products which are acceptable to the markets. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a proposal for a new regulation in EU concerning certain commodities and products associated with deforestation and forest degradation. We understand this is an enhancement of the existing EUTR, seemingly moving away from legality to sustainability in an effort to reduce the EU consumption footprint and to stop deforestation. In general terms, the TAG supports such a proactive move if it does not limit market access. However, there is serious apprehension over this proposal, and TAG wants to draw the Council's attention to a few important points in this proposal. The proposed regulations will only allow the import into the EU of commodities and products which are deemed to be deforestation free, and it seems forest degradation free. Everyone knows that timber harvest from sustainably managed forests do not cause deforestation. We urge the EU to clearly articulate this in the proposed regulation. Another point of concern is plantation products, since these appear unacceptable in the proposed regulation. The EU draft has defined plantation as follows, and I quote, "Plantation means trees established through planting and or deliberate seeding of native or introduced species that is intensively managed and that at maturity is composed of one or two species, has one age class, and has regular tree spacing," unquote. This appears to suggest products from planted forests will be ruled out of the EU market. Every ITTO member country with forest plantations needs to take a close look at the proposed EU regulation. There are also other elements in the proposed regulation which makes us in the TAG feel uncomfortable. For example, the EU has introduced the conceptual label, low risk country, even though this has yet to be defined. One can imagine the controversy for any country which is not labeled low risk. If not low risk, what does this imply? More striking is the lack of recognition of both FSC and PEFC by EU. Certificates from FSC and PEFC must play an important role in the new regulation. They can prove that certified products originated from sustainable forestry and have nothing to do with deforestation. EU recognized that there are many drivers of deforestation. Since this new regulation will also cover meat of bovine animals, cocoa, coffee, palm oil, and soybeans. EU is part of the ITTO families, so that calls on EU to engage with ITTO members, the Secretariat, national and international timber trade organizations, both inside and outside EU, to ensure any proposal is practical and workable on the ground. The TEC also calls on ITTO to work with EU on this proposed regulation. More so, since the proposal referenced FAO, but not ITTO. Ladies and gentlemen, over the years, TEC has pointed out the apparent lack of interest shown by the Council to our trade statement. This has been disappointing since members of the TEC are keen to share their vast experience and deep expertise in the timber trade with the Council. Lately, some TEC members have been talking about a closer working relation with the Council. Indeed, there is also a sense that some member countries are also looking for a similar closer relationship. This trend seems clear in the proposed ITTO Strategic Action Plan for 2022 and 2026, where there are many mentions of TEC and working with TEC. We look forward to the Council adopting this proposed SAP in this current session. The sentiments in the proposed SAP have encouraged TEC to make a proposal of our own to Council on how to improve communications and engagements between the Council and the trade experts. We propose sharing our document, TEC alerts, with the Council in March and September, well in advance of our Council session in November. TEC alerts is a brief document of 2 pages, containing not more than 5 points. These are pertinent points, good or bad, which TEC feels useful for ITTO members to know well in advance of our usual November meeting, so that they can, if needed, be taken up in discussions in Council or committees. This will be a more efficient way of keeping the members updated on latest development affecting the trade and industry. In addition to the TEC alerts, we are, of course, on standby should any request come during the year for trade-related information. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, climate change is very much in the news lately, especially with the Conference of Parties, COP26 in Glasgow. At least 2 initiatives directly related to forest and timber were launched in conjunction with COP26. A coalition of timber industry associations is collectively hosting the World of Wood Festival in London, online and virtually for 6 weeks. The Tropical Timber Accord called for a global solution, not only by FLEGT, to incentivizing international legal trade frameworks for tropical forests and forest product supply chain governance and management. Headlines flashed around the world saying, more than 100 countries agree to end and reverse deforestation by 2030 at a COP26. This is reported by CNN. such a clarion call may mislead the already confused people about the role of timber trade and deforestation. We call upon ITTO as the global leader working with the tropical forest and trade to stand up and state very clearly that harvesting timber is not deforestation. We do not want the general public to take away the call for action in COP26 as to mean avoiding the use of tropical timber products. On the contrary, we want COP26 to galvanize more demand of sustainably produced timber products as a contribution to climate change mitigations. We want ITTO to make this call loud and clear. Thank you very much. As I say, this statement will be uploaded to the website should you want to read it. It will also be appended in the CEM CFI report. Thank you for your attention. I'll give the floor back to Chairman Khairuddin.
Thank you, Mr. Bani, for successfully moderating. You have moderated the session, and also I've delivered the text statement. It's very strong.